Good morning, everyone. I hope you've been well. If you're new to the channel, my name is Zach, my wife is Tracy, and we, along with our two Siberian Huskies, are the Sunshine State Vikings. We're Florida-based adventurers that like to do a lot of off-roading, camping, hiking, and other outdoorsy related activities. Now, normally this morning we would be rolling out in our off-road rig Loki here for yet another weekly adventure for you to enjoy. However, in the last week and a half, we have developed an issue with Loki that we just simply cannot ignore. Several times the check engine light has come on, he started running real rough, kind of like a heavy misfire. So today, for the adventure, we'd like to get him turned around, put in the garage, let's talk about the issue, and see what we can't do to fix it ourselves. Let's get into it. So let's discuss how to diagnose what our issue is. On Loki here, we have installed a Blue Driver OBD2 scanner. That is a tool, it's an onboard diagnostics tool. It's a way to check your error codes like a check engine light as they come on. Having an OBD scanner available for your off-road rig is a very smart tool to have on board. Say you're in a remote area and your check engine light comes on, how are you going to be able to assess whether or not you're headed to a critical engine malfunction or say having a simple issue like an ABS plug wire coming undone? You may not always be able to tell based off of the lights that are displayed on the dashboard, and that's where the OBD scanner comes into play, is it can read the codes that are giving you those lights and give you more insight into your vehicle's issues at that time, so that way you can assess whether or not you're having a critical issue or a minor one. Now, there's a ton of different ways to have OBD scanners, and one of the most convenient ways is to have a Bluetooth OBD scanner that can just plug into your port and live on the truck 24/7. You can then access it from an app and check it on the fly and see what the issue you're currently having is. That's where things get a little tricky, in my opinion, as we found in our research in searching for an OBD scanner that there were a ton of different Bluetooth OBD scanners on the market, and there were a ton of different OBD scanner apps available. Now, it didn't seem like they were always 100% guaranteed as to whether or not those were compatible, and then the issues also got a little bit more tricky whether or not you were an Android user or an iOS user. Now, that's where we really like Blue Driver. This is not sponsored by them in any way, shape, or form. Just gonna put that out there. This is just the one that we like. I like simplicity, and Blue Driver does that because this is their Blue Driver Bluetooth OBD scanner, and it pairs with their app. There's no fussing around, and it works for both iOS and Android. The other thing that I really like about Blue Driver is that it doesn't just read the surface codes. You can have it search really deep throughout the computer and check a ton of different levels of codes and stuff, which may come in handy one day, who knows. Typically the surface ones are really all you need. But the other thing that's really convenient about Blue Driver is in the app, they have a recommended fix for the error code that you're having. Now, that can give you insight as to whether or not you think you have the ability to repair the problem, or whether or not you should get it to a mechanical expert or a professional and have them address the issue for you. So our code that we were having the last week and a half was Ignition Coil A. Now, I'm going to preface this with saying I am not a professional mechanic. This is going to be really layman and explaining what our issue is and why this should be a simple fix. If I get anything wrong here, feel free to correct me down in the comments below. I'm always willing to learn. But basically, we're having an issue with an ignition coil, right? One of them is open, that's a short circuit or what have you. So the way the combustion process works in your engine is a air-fuel mixture is gathered inside the piston chamber, right? And in that chamber, there is the tip of the spark plug. And there is a little metal prong, and it creates a spark, and that's what combusts that air-fuel mixture, pushing the engine along and giving you the power and all that. But a vehicle is only a 12-volt system, typically, with the battery that you have. Now, that's not enough to provide the spark on a spark plug. You need a lot of voltage to do that. So that's where the ignition coil comes into play. It is typically, spark plug is sitting, mounted to the piston chamber there, and above that is sitting the ignition coil, and that's what transforms that 12-volt circuit into thousands of volts to be able to fire off a large arc across the spark plug tip there. And that's what we need to replace today, is one of the ignition coils. Now, I have no way to tell as to which one is the problem, so I would rather just address the whole thing as one big system. I'd rather replace all of the spark plugs, make sure those are all new, and replace all of my ignition coils. Now, typically you have as many spark plugs and ignition coils as you do cylinders in your vehicle. Loki is a V6, so today we have 6 spark plugs and 6 ignition coils to replace. It'll be 3 on one side and 3 on the other. That's why it is a V6. You've got 3 and 3 in a V shape. So let's dive into that today. It looks, in my research, not to be too big of a deal to do this, but that's the essence of adventure. We're gonna get into this and we're gonna find out for ourselves and see how this goes. I hope you enjoy the ride. Let's get into it. First things first, let's crack open the hood of our vehicle and determine where all of the ignition coils are. First 3 we're going to do are going to be the easy ones. They're underneath the intake housing here. It's going to be a little hard to see until we get this out of the way, but the 3 easy ones are going to be here, and the next 3 are going to be over on the driver's side, which are a little easier to see, but these are the ones that are going to be a little bit more challenging to remove and replace. You've got one here, one down here, and there's another one tucked all the way up in the front, up in there. One of the first things you want to do with any repair typically, especially an electrical related repair, is just disconnect the battery. Disconnecting the negative terminal will suffice, but this will keep you from making any unwanted contact and accidentally shorting something out, causing us more issues. So it's always just a safe bet to just go ahead and disconnect the battery terminal, de-energizing all of our plugs and wires. One of the first things we're going to want to gain access to is the full engine bay here, so we're going to take the cover off with these two, by taking off these 2 10mm nuts and removing the cover. Next up for clearancing, we're going to want to remove the intake filter housing. We're just going to disconnect it from, its quick release here and remove this hose just to get this housing part off. This hose clamp here is just a 10mm socket. You're gonna need to get it quite loose in order to get it off. And then we should be able to open our 2 clips, pull the housing off, and remove the filter box, now giving us access to our 3. Oh, well, look at that. Just starting off the repair here and pointing out the 3 ignition coils here, the first, the second, and the third. We may have quickly found our issue. This middle one here is extremely loose. That probably explains why we were having this issue so intermittently. It's probably just rattling loose and creating an open. This may very well change what we're gonna do here today. That's very surprising. On the driver's side here, these 3 are all tight. No play in those. I think at this point it's worth reevaluating our situation. Being that we just found that one of the ignition coils was very loose and is probably intermittently becoming disconnected, and which explains why the issue we've been having has been so intermittent. I don't quite know if it's necessary to do the repair, especially because I like to typically go with OEM parts, and I spent several $100s in buying 6 OEM spark plugs and 6 OEM ignition coils. That's several $100s that I can return the parts for and get back, and set aside for future adventures. Also, possibly put into an actual install or an actual repair on Loki that may actually be needed. Say like the leaf springs that I've been wanting to get replaced on him. I think it just goes to show that you don't really know what you don't know until you know it. And now, warts and all, I think that's definitely what I'm going to do here. I don't think I'm going to go through with the repair. I think what we're going to do is we're going to take this ignition coil out, check on the spark plug, just verify there that everything is looking all right, and then just put it back together and make sure that thing is hunkered down nice and good. Put everything back together on Loki, keep an eye on it for the next week, and hopefully there's no issues, and next week we can get back to doing regular adventures, or next week I may be right back to square one here and doing the repair like I was trying to do today. But like I said, I just don't know if I can justify spending the money if it's not necessarily needed, especially when I can put that money towards better content for you guys. So let's go ahead and check on this one here. I think that's definitely what we're gonna do. All right, so first thing we're gonna do is disconnect the plug connector at the top of the ignition coil, and then we're going to remove this very loose 10mm bolt. All right, and then we can pull up our ignition coil. Okay, next on an extension bar, we're gonna use a 5/8 spark plug socket. It's got a little rubber gasket up at the top that's gonna grab the top of the spark plug for us and help us pull it out of that chamber there. Taking a look at this, this is the spark plug, the middle one with the ignition coil that was very loose. It doesn't look bad to me. I mean, there's a good amount of carbon buildup. One of the things that I read that you want to look for is whether or not the electrode, that tip that's coming out right there, you want to check to see whether or not it's burnt off or rounded or anything like that. It doesn't appear to be so. You can see there's a little bit of discoloration there. No doubt there was probably muddy water getting up in underneath this gasket for the ignition coil, but I went ahead and pulled out the first one for comparison, and this spark plug actually looks worse. It's a lot grimier and there's a lot more carbon buildup on it, but all in all it still looks fairly good to me. Like I said, I'm not a trained professional, and obviously this ignition coil is probably doing just fine. I'm kind of getting the feeling now that maybe I'm better off just replacing the spark plugs while I'm here and returning all the ignition coils. Spark plugs are like $240 a pop, and the ignition coils were $100 a pop. So if I were to replace all 6 of the ignition coils, I'd still be getting a good chunk of change back that I can put into future adventures, especially if it appears that they don't necessarily need to be replaced. But like I said, maybe we're better off just getting these spark plugs taken care of, because I can't even remember the last time they've been replaced. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that. Let's get the third one out and start installing the new spark plugs, and then we'll go ahead and reinstall our original ignition coils, and hopefully everything will be fine with that.
All right, and then so there is the third one. Again, looks like maybe a good amount of carbon buildup. The electrode's not very chewed up there. Doesn't look like, maybe a little slanted, but all three of them look about the same. That back one is actually probably the worst of them. So yeah, let's go ahead and get the new ones and check to make sure they're right. All right, so here are our three brand new spark plugs. From what I understand, shiny zinc coating, no anti-seize needed. If you have a dark coating, use anti-seize. The other thing here to check for the spark plugs to make sure they're prepped and ready to go is to check that gap between the electrode and the prong there. And the way to do that is with this spark plug gap checker. You just kind of insert it on the coin here and spin it around until it stops. Now that's 0.043 inches. That's right where my spec book states that my gap should be. So that one is good to go. This one here is 0.043 as well, good to go. And this one here is actually just a little shy. It's wanting to stop at the 0.040. So we need to widen that gap just a hair. So right here in that little gap opener section, it appears you kind of want to have it like that. You shouldn't really be prying against the electrode. I know enough to tell you that. So we're going to kind of pull that prong out just a little bit, see if that was enough. And that looks like it was just a little too much, so I'm going to press it back down just a hair. Still not quite enough. And there we go, that's starting to sit right where we're supposed to have it. So that is the three spark plugs prepped and ready to go. We're going to put them down into the chamber there and hand thread them with the spark plug socket and the adapter there. I don't remember if I mentioned, but it's a 5/8 spark plug socket for the Tacomas here. So we're going to hand thread that in before we put any sort of tool on there. You really want to make sure you're not cross threading. You're threading this straight into the block of the engine. You don't want to mess that up. All right, I'm going to start at the back. Go ahead and feed that down there. And hand thread that in. There we go. Take our second one. Nice and started. All right, my manual states 15 foot-pounds, so that's what I'm going to go with. Want to be very careful to make sure we're not over-tightening this. Next, I want to address my ignition coil that was loose, that probably had dirty water getting down in it. I've got this electronic cleaner that should be safe enough to clean this up with. So we're going to apply it to the paper towel there. Give this a nice good wipe down. Reinstalling these ignition coils here, we're going to put a little bit of dielectric grease right here at the boot tip here. That's going to help make sure that we're getting a nice sealed connection on the top of that spark plug. You don't want any of the voltage tracking out of there. Now we can go ahead and get all of those holder bolts, 10mm holder bolts put back down. And now I don't have a torque spec for these here, so we're just going to make sure they're nice and snug, maybe a quarter turn past tight. Definitely being sure to make sure this middle one is snug down. You don't want to over tighten, definitely don't want to strip anything out on the engine here. That would be bad. So just a nice quarter turn past tight just to snug it up. Go ahead and plug in all of our connectors for the ignition coils.
And that there is the passenger side, which is going to be the easy side of the truck. Those ignition coils are fairly simple to access once you remove that intake housing there. Let's go ahead and move over to the driver's side, which is going to be just a little bit more difficult because the clearancing is not as easy as it is on the passenger side. There's just a little bit more stuff to get around and a little bit more challenging to get down to the ignition coils there. So this here is the driver's side, and you can see here there's just a little bit more in the way. It's just a little harder to get at. You've got your first one, second one, and third one here. So let's see what we can do to get into those plugs first. This first plug here, we're going to need to just get down here and kind of persuade with the screwdriver, as there's really no way to get your hand back there on that plug to pull it back. So just kind of got to work that off with the screwdriver and set that off to the side, just like that. And then we can do this second one here, same thing. All right. And then that third one, I think we need to clear up some space here first. We're going to do that by loosening up this 12mm support bracket here. And now it's just going to get loosened up so we can wiggle it back and forth. We're going to go ahead and disconnect this vacuum hose. And now it looks like we can get at our plug here. All right. So that there, we've gotten all the plug wires disconnected. Now we can start working on removing our 10mm hold down bolts for the ignition coils. Okay, now that we've got our 3 bolts removed, we can remove the ignition coils. And those there are looking pretty good as well. Not too worrisome. And then we can start removing our spark plugs. Alright, well, sorry I'm so sweaty. We're well into the afternoon now and it is hot in the garage here. But the spark plugs are looking just as they were before. They look fairly decent. Some heavy carbon buildup on the tips, the electrodes there. See if you can see that. The electrodes there don't look too badly chewed up. They're not really rounded or anything like that.
some real heavy carbon buildup on the ones that were in the back. This one's got a lot of oil residue on that. If you know what that means, put it down in the comments for me. Educate me, please. But like we did before, we're going to go ahead and replace these three with brand new spark plugs, make sure our gaps are all good, and carry on with putting the truck back together. All right, so here we go. So what I'm noticing now for this one here is that I was able to get around and remove that spark plug with getting around all of this here. However, I'm noticing now trying to get it in there by hand that this is in the way of me being able to get it in there and ensuring not to cross thread it. So I'm gonna get this up out of our way here just a little bit. It's a 10mm socket to remove this. Hopefully now that'll, yeah, looks like that'll give us the clearance we're looking for to be able to get this installed nice and safely to ensure we're not cross-threading it. We can install all of our connectors to the ignition coils again. They're just a little tricky to get down into. And put back any sort of clearancing that we did. Be sure if you remove this vacuum line that you put that back. You'll be wondering what the heck's happened later. And then we can go ahead and put back our negative terminal back on the battery. Alright, so now we have all 6 spark plugs replaced. 3 on this side, 3 on this side. We've got all of our ignition coils connected back up, hunkered down nice and snug, and we've got all of our connectors back in place. We've got the battery back hooked back up. I think it's time now that we can go ahead and turn on the truck and verify that we've done a good job, make sure everything checks out, runs properly. So let's go ahead and get it fired up real quick. Well, that sounded pretty good to me. I didn't hear any misfiring, the engine felt like it was running smooth, and there were no lights up on the dash. I think we did a good job here today. It's not how I thought the day was going to go, but I'm pleased with how it went. Finding that loose ignition coil early on was surprising, but it might have been the best case scenario, as it told me early on that we didn't necessarily have an issue with the ignition coils and that they didn't necessarily need to be replaced. That one is most likely still good, just coming loose and throwing that code that we initially had telling us that we had an issue. What's going to be able to happen now is I'm going to be able to take those new ignition coils that I bought that were pretty pricey, return them, and put that money back into future adventures. We still went ahead and removed the ignition coils, checked on everything, replaced all 6 spark plugs, still showing you the process of how that would have happened. If you had wanted to replace the ignition coils, you'd have just done so with the new ones. It'd have been the exact same process. All in all, very pleased with how the day went. I'm going to get Loki buttoned up from here and get everything packed up back on the truck. You have a great week, and we hope to see you on the next one.
To learn more about us and find out ways to help support the adventures, visit our website, Sunshine State Vikings. And to keep up with our adventures, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification button, and follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Sunshine State Vikings.